Hello and welcome to the FSAI Food Allergen Breakfast Bite. You're very welcome this morning. I'm Elaine Gibson and I work in the FSAI Communications Department, and I will be your host of sorts this morning. Today's event will last 14 minutes. There will be a 30-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute Q&A. Today I'm joined by Dr. Pat Mahony, who works in the Food Sciences Standards area of the FSAI. He is a chief specialist and very much so an expert in the area of allergens. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them into the questions box and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. We have also taken some time to put together some information and handouts in the handouts section, so feel free to pop into that section and have a little look through those and download them, and Pat will touch on some of those handouts during the event. And finally, if you are on social media, don't be afraid to get in touch. Let us know you're here with hashtag FSAI events. We are at FSAI on Twitter, FSAI info on Twitter, sorry, apologies, and feel free to tweet us and just let us know you're here. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Pat.
Okay, thanks, Elaine, and welcome everybody. We have a large number of attendees. I'm going to turn off my camera now for the presentation, and I'll turn it back on then again. You don't need to be looking at me when getting serious information, so I'll turn off the camera and proceed. Before I do, I want to thank Elaine and Jane, who organise these webinars, and to Caroline, our backup, in case we should have technical difficulties or if I keel over for some reason. So I'll turn off the camera now and we'll get going. Okay, so today we're going to talk about food allergen declaration, and it'll take about a half an hour, and as Elaine said, we'll take questions afterwards, and if for some reason you can't get your question in, or if for some reason we can't answer it, we will answer it directly afterwards, so don't worry. As I said, it's great to have this many people here because it shows that you're interested and understand that food allergens and declaring food allergens is a serious issue. Now, the first slide here is a brief one to show you 14 allergens that in Europe we have to declare in all foods and all beverages. A few quick points about these. First of all, cereals containing gluten. If you're declaring that, you don't say contains gluten, you say contains wheat or barley or rye or whatever it is. Now, it's not a major non-compliance. If you say gluten, you can actually say gluten as well, but it should mention the wheat, barley or rye. Don't forget, peanuts and nuts are very different types of products. Peanut is a ground nut, whereas the other nuts, of which there are 8, are tree nuts. So in general, when you're saying contains nuts, that's fine too, but if you want to say contains almonds or pistachios or whatever, that's okay as well. Now you might ask yourself, why is there only 14 allergens? Why is there not 5? Why is there not 25? Well, in many countries around the world, they consider the big 8 as the big problem, and the big 8, as they would consider them, are included here in the list of 14. Peanuts, egg, milk, soya, etc. But in Europe, we have 28 now, we have 27 member states, and of course there is a bit of politics at play, so some countries would have specific problems with other than the big 8 allergens, and so they're included. This list has been the same for 10, 15 years now, and there's no real prospect of opening it at the moment. A lot of the problem there would be politics, really. If you open the list, every member state would have their own particulars. For example, in Ireland and the UK, we have a particular problem with kiwi fruit. So we would like that to be in there, and I'm sure other member states have the same. But for now, it's the 14. And if you need to declare other allergens for whatever reason, then that's all well and good too. But the 14 have to be declared in all foods and beverages. So a brief mention of the legislation, and I won't dwell on this for too long. The primary founding legislation is from 2011. So pre-packed foods have had to declare their allergens in the list of ingredients for about 20 years now. But in 2011, under this legislation, which is called FIC, Food Information for Consumers, the policymakers decided in their wisdom that there was no sense in having the pre-packed foods declaring allergens and the non-pre-packed foods not declaring allergens. People eat all types of foods, whether it's pre-packed or not. So what this legislation said was all foods, all beverages must declare these 14 allergens. But what they did do, and this sometimes does happen, they left it up to the member states to decide how exactly they would do it. So in Ireland, our government did a consultation facilitated by FSAI, and they asked the food industry and consumers, which way would you like this information to be provided to you? And the overwhelming consensus was that they would like it in written format upfront. Now, this is different throughout the EU. Some member states, like the UK, have it in written format, but you have to ask for it. In Ireland, we're different. We went the full mile as such, so anybody walking into a restaurant or a cafe should be able to access that information without having to ask for it. Now, a few clarifications before I go on too far. We understand, and everybody understands, that kitchens and warehouses and buffets are not sterile areas, so it's impossible to prevent totally cross-contamination. So we kind of consider that it's not inevitable as such, but it's strongly likely. Having said that, cross-contamination can be reduced and eliminated really in a well-managed area, but we understand, the vagaries of rush hours in kitchens and stuff. Allergens will get around the place. Now, to help this, we have added a new section to the Safe Catering Pack in the last year, and it's got to do with how you handle allergens, how you get them into your establishment, your suppliers, storage, etc. So that's available now for purchase, and you can go online and find that. It's a very useful document, and it usually sails out the door, so it's now got a new added bonus in the allergen side of things. Now, another clarification, when you look at that list of 14 allergens, you'll see milk, and an obvious question is, and it's the same for eggs, is this cow's milk, sheep's milk, goat's milk, or are the eggs chicken eggs or duck eggs or goose eggs? And the simple answer is it's the milk and the eggs of farmed animals. Now, if you go off to find exotic animals and get their milk or eggs, technically that wouldn't require a declaration, but I don't see that being too much of an issue. The same is the case for mollusks or crustaceans or fish. Again, there's no distinction as to which of these species it matters to. For example, some people are allergic to cod or to hake or to haddock, but not to other fish. So in general, you could use the word fish to say contains fish, and that suffices. If you want to say contains cod or contains haddock, that's fine too, but you need to make sure that you are aware of the actual species, otherwise that could be a problem. Similarly with mustard, mustard is not really a well-defined product. Yes, it does contain the seed, rapeseed, of a few species of rapeseed, but then there are other products like vinegar and additives, etc. So it's not clearly defined in legislation as to what exactly mustard is. Having said that, if it says mustard in the pack, then you can take it for safety reasons that it's an allergen that has to be declared. Now, in the legislation itself, it also defines products that are exempt from declaration. Cereals containing gluten, fish, soybeans, and milk. Some products that are derived from these ingredients are so well refined and so derived that they contain protein no longer. And protein, of course, is the allergenic component of all these food allergens. So when there's no protein present, then you don't have to declare these products. And that's the way it works for now. This will, I suppose, be added to as time goes on, but for now you can take it. This probably affects the pre-packed foods sector more than the non-pre-packed or loose foods, but still it's good to be aware of these. Another thing that the policymakers decided was to be pragmatic in as much as possible. So if you have a fish pie, you don't have to say it contains fish, obviously. But now if that fish pie contains egg and milk and soya, you have to declare the egg and milk and soya. And we would advise in that case, you would also say it contains fish as well. The reason being for that is that if it's got a declaration for allergens for egg and milk and soya, and you don't mention fish, even though fish is in the name, people could mistake it to think that, oh, it's only just a fish name and not, there's no fish in the actual pie. So it's better to be safe than sorry. And in all cases, if you're in doubt, declare it. There's nobody can take any issue with you if you declare something just because you're being safe. Now, probably the most important slide, I think, in this presentation is why exactly do we need this? We've been told by chefs and restaurateurs over the years that we don't need to be told what to do and how to do it in terms of allergens. People ask us all the time, that we're allergic to this and that. Well, here's a few good reasons. First of all, there's two bits of legislation there, the European FIC legislation and then the national statutory instruments that brought into play in 2014, the requirement to label these allergens in written format. So there, as they say, that's the law and that's what we have to abide by. But for me, the biggest issue, and this is what we've seen on the ground, is awareness and understanding of the seriousness of allergies. Food allergies can be a life and death issue. And if you look at those three people on the side there, they're young teenagers. They're no longer with us for various reasons. In one case, there was a certain amount of confusion. Food was ate that shouldn't have been ate by a person. In another case, the labelling laws in the UK were insufficient. Now they've changed slightly since that. That's the girl in the middle. She ate a baguette which didn't mention the presence of sesame seeds. She had a severe allergy to sesame seeds. She looked at the baguette and didn't see the sesame seeds because they were in the middle of it rather than being sprinkled on the top as they usually are. And she died on a plane to France. And then even sadder again is the chap at the bottom who was out celebrating his 18th birthday, had a severe milk allergy and told the staff at the restaurant, I have a severe milk allergy, please don't put any milk in there. And they were very cognizant of it and they went off and did their best. But somewhere along the line, they forgot that the chicken breast that he was given was marinated in milk, and so he died as well. So there are other instances where negligence has put people in jail, but also fraud. One individual is serving time in the UK because he switched almonds for mixed nuts with contained peanuts for cost reasons. Didn't inform his staff. And one man died when he ordered a takeaway. He had expressly said no peanuts, and unfortunately that man was found a few days later in his apartment. So we always emphasize to people with food allergies and intolerance that this requirement for allergy declaration is not a cure. It's another tool in the box for them to avoid foods that they should avoid or have to avoid. These people have an ultimate responsibility for their own safety, and if you ever meet one, you'll probably see a backpack with them where they bring their food generally with them. They'll have a few EpiPens and they'll have other devices as well. Don't forget EpiPens, they don't cure or don't fix the problem, they buy them time to get to hospital. So, they rely on the information they get from manufacturers and caterers like yourselves. And now, not to overstate this, but if you want to go on Google and look at this, I think if you're trying to convince staff or maybe your superiors or supervisors in a restaurant or whatever that food allergies are serious, here's a young woman who had a promising profile in television. She was a successful TV producer on the morning show on ITV, went to Hungary for her holidays, had a severe nut allergy, went all the ways and produced a card in Hungarian for any restaurants she would visit and said, I am a severe nut allergy person and please do not give me any nuts. Went to a restaurant and unfortunately, somewhere along the line, she died for 6 minutes after a reaction to peanuts. She was recovered, but this is her fate for life now. I won't dwell on it, but this is a useful video if you do want to convince either staff or management that this is a serious issue. Okay, now on to the facts and figures and the details of how exactly you can comply with this requirement. It's a legal requirement, so when inspectors, environmental health officers go into a premises, this is now on their list and they're taking action over 6 years now since this legislation came in. So what's a non-pre-packed food? It's anything sold without packaging or packed on the premises at the consumer's request or pre-packed for direct sale. So if it's not exactly obvious and if something has no packaging on it, then it's loose. If it has packaging, for example, you go into a garage forecourt or other shops and there are sandwiches already made up and they're in nice packaging, they're still considered non-pre-packed foods. Anyway, the ultimate aim here is that all foods all beverages have to contain the allergen labeling and have to have it up front. So in other words, there's no exemptions from this, except the caveats I'll show you later on. Now, when or where should we declare the allergens? The legislation says it's at the point of presentation, the point of sale, or the point of supply. To make that simpler, it's before the product is paid for. It's no use declaring allergens after somebody's paid for it, because it just doesn't work as such. You can also produce that information verbally in addition to the written format. But in Ireland, we're one of the few countries that have a requirement that it's in written format. So here are the legal requirements. First of all, it has to say contains. That's English language, obviously. You couldn't just put milk on its own on a container because that wouldn't make any sense. So you have to say it contains milk, contains wheat, etc. If you do go the extra mile, for example, you're making sandwiches and you'll say, I'll be very useful to the consumer and put on a full list of ingredients, you have to be careful, because under the FIC regulation, which is the EU law, you have to use the font size, you have to place it on the package in certain areas. So it's a bit onerous when you don't have to. So it's best, if it's a non-prepacked food, to just say it contains whatever allergens. We're in Ireland, where primarily we speak English and in some places Irish, so it has to be in English or Irish. It has to be in a conspicuous place. So if you go into a restaurant, there's no use in putting it somewhere behind the counter or under the till or somewhere. It has to be somewhere that if a person walks into your premises, they can sit down, and if they feel like it, they can go and look either on the menu at the allergens or somewhere that you have the information available without asking for staff assistance. Now, in the UK, or if you cross the border to Northern Ireland, you'll have to ask for it. They don't produce it up front. And that's something useful to be aware of. It has to be visible. So again, there's a few ways of doing that, and I'll show you that. It has to be legible and clear and identify which food contains which allergens. I've been in a few takeaways where there's an A4 sheet on or near the counter, and you really would need a magnifying glass to see it. The font size is so small. That's totally non-compliant, and an inspector will pick that up straight away. It has to be clear and identify which foods contain which allergens, and I'll show you some examples of non-compliant signage later. Now, all food business operators must be familiar with the allergens they handle. We can take it that everyone knows about Campylobacter and Salmonella and E. coli, and they're very, up to date with the hygiene measures. Food allergens are just as serious and probably even more serious than such food poisoning. Now, one thing we always get questions about is suppliers. Suppliers are food businesses, and they are required to follow this legislation as well. When we've done these breakfast bites before, we've often got questions as to how can I make my supplier give me the allergen information? Well, you can do that in several ways. First of all, if they don't produce it for you, you can drop them. Now, sometimes if they're niche producers, you can't really find an alternative, but then you contact your local environmental health officer or directly to FSAI, and we'll approach them, because this can be a life or death issue. So if they can't supply allergen information, then they really shouldn't be in the food business. Now, if you do have a sitting restaurant, these are a few examples of how you can achieve compliance. On the left, you can just put the allergen under each menu, or on the right, you can have it as a legend form with numbers or letters. Now, this isn't always possible in a restaurant or situation where you have a very busy menu and there's a lot of choice. So in that case, what you can do is get all your menu items and tick off the individual allergens in each menu item. Put that in a separate folder or a sheet, even somewhere that's easily accessed or accessible by the customer. And then you can identify that location either on the menu, or like I have here on this slide, you can put a few signs up around the actual restaurant to say, if you need to check the allergens in the menu items, please go to the counter or the checkout or whatever. And again, you shouldn't have to ask any staff member for assistance. It should be there without assistance. Don't forget, most places will have lunchtime specials or evening specials, etc. and chalkboards and other situations. The allergen information has to be presented there as well. Now, buffet services are particularly problematic, but they still require the allergen information to be provided. So it either can be provided beside each platter, as you see here, even though it's not provided there, or it can be in that folder system where somewhere near those platters, the list of platters, including the allergens, is provided. Now, as you see here, these people are dipping spoons and forks into different plates. This is a problem because you're talking cross-contamination at a high level here, and this is something businesses need to be careful of as well. Now, if you go into a pub and even if it doesn't do any loose foods, if they just have, let's say, crisps or chocolate or whatever, they will still have to provide allergen information on any loose beverages such as draft beer or wine by the glass, etc. There are ways of doing that, but it is mandatory. And I suppose my own experience is that very few pubs have this in place already, but it also goes for restaurants or hotels as well. All your beers and wines and juices and smoothies have to have a list of allergens associated with them. If you're a catering establishment and you do different types of caterers, if you simply produce, let's say, sandwiches for meetings as we do in FSAI, well, let's take that as an example. If somebody produces platters of sandwiches for FSAI meetings, the people who produce those sandwiches must provide allergen information to the FSAI. Now, when we have 20 or 30 people at a meeting, we're not a food business per se, so we're not obliged to convey that information to the people consuming the sandwiches, but common sense would say that you would do that. Once the food business has provided the information to the purchaser, which would be FSAI in that case, then they've fulfilled their obligation. Now, having said all that, this has never been tested out in a court of in a court system, so we don't know how that would work. But as far as we're concerned, once you provide the allergen information to the person buying your food, you've done your bit. Now, it's slightly different when you come to hotels or restaurants that are hosting celebrations like weddings, etc. If you're allowing food not produced on your premises to be consumed on your premises, then you're kind of asking for trouble, and that's something you can check out a bit more. So let's say there's a wedding and the spouse, one of the spouse's parents produced a cake, and if they're not a food business, they're not required to put allergen information on there. Somebody gets sick at the wedding, and then the trouble starts. Who's actually responsible? So I suppose the best advice is that in certain situations, you can either check with your local environmental health officer or contact FSAI, and we'll give you the best advice we can, but they're not always black and white situations. Don't forget, it takes a very small amount of protein from these allergens, and I'll show you that later in graphic form, to cause serious injury or death. So small things like condiments, sauces, gravies, they might seem very little in the greater scheme of the whole menu system, but they can cause severe problems. Suppliers, I mentioned them too much, but they seem to be a problem for many food businesses that contact us and that appear. It appears a problem with those suppliers that they don't feel they're required to fulfill this obligation, but they are. Now, there are a number of different types of scenarios where, practicality rules that it's just not that straightforward. For example, hospitals or care homes, creches, prisons, charities like soup rooms, planes and trains and boats, and even the contract caterers. So they're all very different scenarios, and they all require different ways of compliance. If you go online to the FSAI website, you'll find this green booklet, and in there we have addressed as many of those different scenarios as we could think of now. If there is a scenario that we haven't covered, by all means, get onto us and we'll address that and add to that brochure. So I can't go through all of these scenarios in the short time we have, but what I'll do is talk about, let's say, hospitals or care homes as an example. And if you need further information for your type of situation, then you can look at that green booklet or contact us directly. So hospitals and care homes, they're generally round-the-clock care. The people in those places would be aware of the residents' needs, even with the food allergies. They are controlled environments, and they contain people with varied dependency. Some people are, fully functional and don't need a whole lot of help. Others are totally dependent. You'll have long-term residents, short-term residents. You'll also have visitors coming in, and you'll probably have a general dining area. So this is how we see that the best way to comply with the Allergen Declaration legislation. First of all, written allergen declaration is required, full stop. If you have a common dining area, it's the same as a restaurant. It has to be produced in a written format where the residents can go and look at it for themselves without help from the staff. If a resident is confined to a room for whatever reason, then they should also be provided with that written allergen information. Now, as it will be in care homes of various types, you will have people who have certain incapacities, whether they're mental or physical, and they will require help. For example, somebody who's blind will actually not be able to read a menu unless it's produced in Braille, which may not be feasible for a lot of places. Other people may have dementia or other learning difficulties and may not be able to process a written allergen declaration on a menu, for example. In those cases, a designated guardian or carer, probably a member of staff, will be required to make sure that those people do not get exposed to a food containing an allergy that could cause an adverse reaction. Now, be careful as well when you're visiting, when you have visitors coming to these places to visit residents, and if you're kind enough to offer tea and sandwiches, etc., be aware that those sandwiches or other types of food can have allergens and can cause reactions, and the visitors should be made aware of the allergens in there in written format as well. And again, suppliers, you can't say it often enough. They have to, cooperate and produce the information, because if they don't give you the information, you can't pass it on. And if somebody has an adverse reaction, you'll be the first port of call there. Now, over the 6 years that this legislation has been in place, we've seen a lot of different types of efforts, and I suppose we can take some of the blame here. We didn't get out with enough messages, and sometimes it's probably laziness on the part of the food business. Other times it's misinformation coming from consultants or whatever, who knows. So these statements, and there's probably others, but these ones on their own are not compliant. For example, if you have any questions on food allergies, please ask your staff member. That's fine if you're north of the border or in the UK or some other member states, but in Ireland, if you don't have the allergen declarations in written format, easily accessible, etc., and this is all you have, then that's non-compliant, and an inspector will pull that up straight away. Another one that's a bit lazy is we use all of the following allergens. Now, on its own, it's actually fine. You can use that, but it has to be in conjunction with the actual declaration in writing. All our foods may contain the following allergens. It's the same thing. On its own, it's not compliant. Now, unfortunately, in recent times, we've seen instances of establishments putting these kind of notices up for consumers. And in one case, we got a complaint from somebody who, when they declared to the staff that they had a serious allergy, what they got was a letter to be signed, a letter of indemnity. Now, under food law, there's nothing we can do about that. I'm sure social media will probably take care of those issues. It's not the best practice in terms of communication, but it doesn't absolve the establishment from declaring their allergens in written format. So again, that's not compliant on its own. Now, something that's very important in the current climate, where a lot of restaurants have moved to the takeaway side of things, and which have been very welcome and very useful for a lot of people in the current lockdown situation. But you have to be careful when you do this, because you're now in a different setting and the rules are slightly different. So for example, if you're a restaurant, most people will be coming into you, and if you don't do takeaway, most people will be coming in, sitting down, and you'll be dealing face to face, and you'll have to have your written allergen information either on the menu or in that folder I mentioned. Now you move to the takeaway business and people can't come in. Now you're not dealing face to face. So you have to have the allergen information somewhere in writing before people order and pay for their food. It's the few we've checked, it's not always the case because they're not used to doing this. So you need to have an online presence or some presence, whether it be leaflets or whatever, where your allergens are dropped. So you're going to have to advertise your fare somehow, and whether it be online or in printed leaflets, that's up to you, but the allergen information has to be presented at the same time. The legislation is slightly different here as well, in that you're required to provide that information in written format, both before the product is purchased, but also at the moment of delivery. Now, it only has to be in written format at one of those stages. It can be verbal, let's say at the moment of delivery or at the time of ordering, but it has to be at both stages. Now, our recommendation is that you have leaflets or some sort of information with the menus and the allergens that can be provided to the person at the moment of delivery. That's an important facet for those of you who are new to the takeaway business, because somebody getting your food that they didn't order in terms of allergens, and this is what we've seen in other situations. People just die, people get sick, so it is a very serious issue. If you're thinking of putting any kind of gimmicks like allergen-free or gluten-free, vegan, these can be very useful when they're used properly, but we find, especially in the pre-packed food side of things, that they're used as much as gimmicks as they are as information sources. When you put all these voluntary labels, and these are voluntary in that they're not actually mandated by any piece of legislation, then you're entirely responsible for the, I suppose, the accuracy of these. And these are some things we do check on a regular basis. Now, voluntary declarations like the precautionary allergen labels have become a bit of a problem in the prepackaged food industry. We're aware of some problems in that they're provided in foods purely to stave off the possibility of litigation should something go wrong. We're not even sure is that a feasible option, but these are very useful labels if there's a situation where you know that you can't entirely eliminate the possibility of cross-contamination, and it's a very useful tool. The problem in recent years is that it's become so pervasive that people with allergies and intolerances become immune to them and take chances. Even if they don't become immune to them, they just cut that perfectly safe food out of their already restricted diet, and so it is a problem. So we would recommend that judicious use of these labels is taken on the basis of a risk assessment. So if you do a risk assessment on your business and you say, look, there's no way we can totally eliminate cross-contamination, then it's fair enough. Other than that, you can be asked by an inspector, why have you got that label on there? And this goes for pre-packed and for loose foods as well. And don't forget, even if you do have those on there, we haven't seen any evidence that they will stave off litigation or win you a court case in the event of an adverse reaction. This is just a quick look to see the absolute minuscule amount of protein from these allergens that can cause serious damage and death. So what we have here is the reference dose, which means that 95% of the people that have these allergies will not react, but there will be a small percent that will react below this. So if you look at peanuts there, 0.2 of a milligram of peanut protein, which is 200 millionths of a gram, is enough to cause serious injury for most of those people with that allergy. Look at egg, and it's even lower still. 30 millionths of a gram of egg protein can cause damage. So this is the issue, and this is why cross-contamination is an issue as well, because even where we do find low levels, we still have to do a risk assessment. So in general, if you're trying to manage food allergens, if it's present at low levels, and if we're finding that it's undeclared in a food, we will do a risk assessment. And if after our risk assessment, we think it still poses a major risk, then we will ask for it to be relabeled or redeclared in the case of loose foods, or even removed from the market if the system just isn't working. If it's found in a restaurant setting, for example, the inspectors will go behind the scenes into the kitchen to see, is the food safety management system actually working, or is it in place? We do understand, and everyone does, that kitchens and such areas are not sterile areas, so it is difficult at sometimes, let's say rush hour for lunch or dinner or whatever, but still cross-contamination can be managed to a large degree using the food safety management system. And again, our safe catering pack would be useful there. Now, just to remind you that if the Food Safety Authority, through our frontline agencies, the environmental health officers, if we don't take action on the food, then if somebody has an adverse reaction, that's between them and the legal system itself. We don't get involved, although we might be called as witnesses or whatever. So, we operate on the basis of implementing food law, but if somebody gets sick in your premises, then it's between you and them and the court system. Precautionary allergen information is very useful, but it's at the moment, our evidence is that it's being overused, and the judicious use of it is not evident at this time. Don't forget, if you make a voluntary claim, it has to be accurate. So allergen-free, it means allergen-free, no allergen in there, whether it be peanuts or milk or whatever. And something that's relatively new in the current age is vegan. Now, we have people complaining to us that they asked for vegan and they found that there was animal products in there. I suppose there is no legal definition of vegan at the moment, so we can't say, if you say vegan on your product, it can't contain milk or egg or fish or crustaceans, because just like normal allergens, cross-contamination is a feature of life, really. It's pragmatic. So what we do warn the general consumers that if you're allergic to any of those animal-derived products, that just because a product says vegan doesn't mean to say you're 100% safe. Now I'm going to finish up with some resources. Our colleagues in Safe Food have a lot of resources on their website, and if you click onto their website, it gives you a range of printed material and videos and tutorials as to how to keep your premises safe and to operate behind the scenes in the kitchen, etc. As per FSAI, we have produced a checklist, and we have another brochure on the side there which contains all the allergens, the 14 allergens. The checklist can be useful if you just put the menu items down the left-hand side and then tick along the way which allergens are in there. It's a very simple system, and these can be printed off our website. And again, don't forget our website, our Safe Catering Pack. It's available to purchase online anytime you need. We also have other printed material, and again, of those, the green booklet on the right is probably the most important for the various scenarios that I talked about. Down at the bottom there is a very useful tool. It's a free online tool. So once you put in, if you're making a new product with a new recipe, this will automatically highlight to you which ingredients need to be highlighted as allergens. We also have a food allergen alert, and we have several thousand people who are subscribed to this, and anybody can. And what this does is once we get information of undeclared allergens in any product, whether or not action has been taken, we will alert those people by text or email straight away as to the presence of this undeclared allergen. And that's a very popular part. And then on our website, we have all the information you could need, regulations, how you deal with gluten-free, etc., etc. If there's something missing on there as well, please let us know and we'll address that. And so I can leave you back to Elaine now, and we'll try and deal with as many questions as we can. But if we can't, please send them into info@FSAI and we'll answer it directly. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Pat. I can see from the question box and also from social media that the presentation is going down very well, so thank you. We have received a number of questions, so I'm going to run through a couple of them. I know that we are quickly running out of time, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. So the first person is asking, is the supply of allergen information for loose foods in an electric tablet form acceptable? For example, the tablet is in the loose food area and easily accessible and usable.
Simple answer for that, yes. If it's an electronic form, it doesn't have to be printed on paper or anything. If it's easily accessible without having to ask staff, yes, electronic or tablet form is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much, Pat. Another listener says, due to COVID-19, it is advised that non-prepacked food be covered or packaged like wrapped in cling film. Therefore, does the allergen information need to be applied to the wrapping?
Well, the actual declaration doesn't have to be literally tied to the food. It should really be where the people are looking at the menu options, and therefore they would be able to see what's in each menu option. And then I suppose if it's for delivery, it has to be provided with the delivery at the moment of delivery. So whether it's attached to the packaging or whether it's in a leaflet form, that's entirely up to the business.
Okay, perfect. We have another almost similar question. They say, can you use a label on the delivery meal to highlight the allergens instead of a menu? It's one you've kind of covered already, more or less.
Yes, I think once the written information is provided before the product is purchased, a label on the final product at delivery is fine too. That's a perfectly good way, as well as a leaflet or something like that. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Pat. The next question is, if customers collect their food from the premises, does the operator need to provide allergen information at collection as well as at the ordering point?
No, that would be slightly different, because the delivery isn't a part of that function as such, because you're collecting it yourself. So you will have ordered it. You will have seen the allergen information. You should have seen the allergen information before you pay for it. So there is no delivery as such because you're picking it up yourself.
Perfect. We have an interesting question about pizza, actually. So one listener has said, how can you say something is made without gluten? Example, a gluten-free pizza base.
There is specific legislation to do with gluten-free. So if you want to provide information that a certain product is gluten-free, it has to be below 100 parts per million. That's a separate issue to an allergen declaration. So there is a slight strange situation where you could have on a product contains wheat, and then you could have on the same product gluten-free because it's below 100 parts per million of gluten. So it's important not to mix up gluten-free, which is a voluntary label, but it is regulated, versus the positive allergen declaration.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. I think that's all for now in terms of questions. If you did ask a question and we didn't get it today, please do send it into our advice line at the email address below. So it's info@fsai.ie. That brings our event to an end today. I'm just going to run through one or two things just before we close off. So the first thing is that there will be a survey going out with a follow-up email today. So I would really appreciate if you would fill it in. In regards to the event, there will be a video of this event that will go up on social media tomorrow. So feel free to pop to our social media channels and have a little look back if there's anything you want to look back at, or do share it if you would like to share it. Another thing is that World Food Safety Day is this Sunday. The hashtag is World Food Safety Day. So, you know, if you do think of it on the day, feel free to share and raise awareness about it. And finally, if you did enjoy today's event, please do subscribe for our event alerts. So you can subscribe for those on our website. So the web address is www.fsai.ie/subscribe. A special thank you to you all for joining us this morning. We do really appreciate it. We hope to see you again. Goodbye and have a great day. Thank you.